Okay, hello. Good to welcome you back to another episode of ideasSPACE with the urban design group UrbanNous and me, Christopher Martin. I'm an urban designer and planner focusing on the design of public realm and streets, co-founder and director of urban strategy at Urban Movement, and on the executive committee of the Urban Design Group. We want to explore the full range of issues that influence the design of cities and shape society with this series, so we can sharpen our focus and create more enjoyable places. And for this episode, we'll be focusing on walking. Walking and wheeling is something we do every day. Every journey involves it, and the benefits of walking to us as human beings are simply vast. All this is on the back of growing attention and appreciation for everyday walking by the UK government. But we still have a long way to go to protect high-quality walking environments in all towns and cities. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Lord Bates, Michael Bates, President of Living Streets and a walking champion. Lord Bates, thank you so much for joining us.
Delighted to be with you, Chris.
It's very kind, and I very much appreciate that you taking the time to speak with us. And first, I wonder if I could invite you to introduce us to your work and indeed your relationship with and feeling towards walking.
Well, as you say, walking is something that most of us do, and a lot of the time. And I suppose what I've done is taken it to a bit of an extreme, and it's for a purpose. And so I have, over the past 10 years, walked 9,189 miles in 25 countries. In the name of peace and friendship, and raised over £1 million for charities such as UNICEF, Save the Children, War Child, and the Red Cross. And what I've found through that experience is it has been completely life-changing on two levels. First of all, most of the time when we visit other countries, we could be anywhere. They're urban centres, they're tourist destinations. They are the same virtually all over the world. And what walking does is it takes you out of the city centre, out into rural communities, into semi-urban spaces, into the unfashionable places and the unfashionable suburbs. And you get a chance to meet and see and smell and feel those communities. So that's one point. The second thing is that it has a power to it. You know, a long way through history, you've seen frequently how people have chosen walking. The simple act of walking is a very powerful way of communicating a need for change. And in my particular area, the area of promoting peace and understanding internationally, walking has been used very frequently by many great people. And so in many ways, I follow in their footsteps, quite literally. The purpose of my initial walk, which I did from Olympia in Greece to London, was to raise awareness for the Olympic truce. Now, what's the Olympic truce got to do with walking? Well, other than the fact that it was the period of peace which traditionally transcends the Olympic Games. And it was a sacred declaration of peace to allow athletes and spectators to travel to the games through hostile territory many times in ancient Greece. In the modern era, it is something which is a United Nations resolution and which everybody has to sign up to take part in the games, and nobody observes. And I came up with this really wild idea that for London 2012, we might try to be the first place where the truce was not only signed up to, but actually people did something to make a difference about it. And I tried for a year various routes to try and bring about change, lots of meetings, speeches. I even tried to introduce legislation in this very place to make it mandatory, but it all failed. And then I came up with the idea of just setting off and walking from Olympia back to London. It took me a year. For the first 3 months, I don't think anybody really realized that I'd gone and didn't particularly miss me. But as I made more progress, more people seemed to notice it. And it seemed to be that the simple act of walking carried more weight than my letters and speeches. It might be, if you saw my letters and speeches, that you'd think that wasn't a particular surprising thing. But gradually, they're built up real strength behind it, from the Prime Minister through people like Lord Cole and William Hague, who was then Foreign Secretary, And in the end of it, for the first time, we got some 85 different initiatives in different countries supporting the concept of the Olympic truce. And it was a real small part of what made London 2012 memorable. And I think it's a very good lesson to young people and to everyone, is that sometimes you think you've got power, but you think you've got power by some position or by some place. And yet what I found is, with all of the privilege and opportunity that I have through serving as a member of Parliament, it didn't match the simple act of getting out there and putting your rucksack on and showing that you really believe in something. And so that made a difference. And as I walked, there were a few lessons which came to mind. The first one was that I walked through about 14 different countries on that walk. And what struck me was not how different people were, but how similar they were. You smiled at somebody, they smiled back. You asked for directions, they did their best to help. You asked for some food, they might have something available, some water. You asked for accommodation, they asked for 20 euros, or if it was in Switzerland, 100 euros. It was people were the same wherever you went. And I felt that was a real lesson that I learned from that. The second thing was how small steps can make a very big difference. And with this, I'll close my introduction. Because often people want to think that perhaps with one tweet, one snazzy video, it'll go viral and they'll get some huge impact behind some great and worthy initiative. But the remarkable thing about walking is that, you keep putting one foot in front of another. I don't walk fast. I walk at 3 miles per hour. It doesn't matter whether I'm going up a hill or down a hill. It's exactly the same. I don't know why that is. But it's 3 miles an hour. And you keep doing that for 7 hours a day, and you've covered 21 miles. And another thing which I discovered, to my astonishment, was that in walking across very ancient landscapes, particularly in Europe, that of course our whole world was designed around accommodating people walking from one place to another. And it took me about 10 days to figure this out, walking from Olympia to Athens. And I would think, it's a coincidence. I've just finished a day's walk and I'm actually in a place where I can find some accommodation and something to eat. And then I'd walk another day and here was another settlement and here was another settlement. And of course, it was geared up for the fact that people did walk. So in that sense, you were touching history, you were touching people, and also making a real difference. That was the power of walking that I learned in 2011, 2012, and which has traveled with me through my life since then.
Thank you for that. It's really rather inspiring, and I think it highlights to me the power that walking has over our bodies, but also very much our minds, and how it can sort of bring some quite considerable thought. And I think touching on urban design as well, I think it's very much and very sort of the powers that can come of this when we consider it from designing successful places are key, and bringing things back to an urban context. And looking forward, indeed, you've recently taken the position of president at Living Streets, which, as the listeners will know, is the charity for everyday walking. Building on the power that walking has, which you've touched on very eloquently there, I wonder if you could tell us what are your ambitions for everyday walking in the United Kingdom, and indeed, in turn, what are your ambitions for the post of Living Streets?
It's a great question, and thank you very much, Chris, for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. So, Living Streets is the oldest walking charity in the UK, and it does a tremendous work in promoting walking. Of course, in the current COVID pandemic, suddenly perhaps walking and cycling in the outdoors have become not only a very important part of our lives, but a key core part of public health in the UK. And the government has pledged some 2 billion towards a cycling and walking strategy. Additional resources were announced this week. And the benefits of walking are quite immense. I remember seeing one headline that said that for walking 10 minutes per day, you will add 18 months to your life. And I got a text from my son who said, if that's true, then it looks as if we'll be stuck with you forever. And so there are some particular benefits to that. But I think also the benefits transcend that. They go to mental health. I think many people being alone, being isolated, being away from nature, being away from seeing a different environment can actually open people's attention to the world and aid mental health and well-being. When you walk, when we're not in lockdown, of course, there are opportunities to engage in commerce. And our high street shops are really struggling. Now, with all due affection to our road-using friends and cyclists and those on public transport, when you kind of, hurtling past various shops and what have you, it's a lot more difficult to call in, pop in, browse, look in a window than it is when you're walking. So that is another benefit to it. And there's a final benefit, which I just want to say about, particularly resonates, I think, with young people. Not so long ago, I met with a group of young people who were in Parliament Square protesting about climate change and making their voice heard in the remarkable spirit of Greta Thunberg and their example. And these were young people who cared passionately about it. And I really am inspired by our young people in this generation, when we were kind of all about sort of love and music and festivals and the rest of it. They're caring about the planet, and I think that's something to be taken seriously. But when I talked to them, they were, rightly quite critical and challenging of what the government was doing. And I said to them, I said, sometimes a very frustrating thing in life is that you feel that you've got a big problem with something you care passionate about, but you feel utterly powerless to do anything about it. I said, now, how many of you actually walk to school? And a couple of people put their hands up. I said, well, that's a way in which every day you can make a tangible difference to the climate, to the environment in which we are in. And we had a great discussion then about the barriers potentially to walking to school and safer streets and the way in which they operated, all areas that you'll be very familiar with through your work. So I think there are multiple levels to engage people in walking, and I think it's a great opportunity to do that. 71% of people walk once a week, which is a fantastic place to start. We just got to get people to do it more. The other thing which I think needs to be said about walking is that whereas sometimes you're cycling as a demographic often is more male, more young, more middle-class professional, more southern England. Walking is more broader spread across the whole country, across all socioeconomic groups. It reaches. There are more females who walk than men who walk. Walk is open to people of all ages. So there are no barriers to entry. You don't need to buy a bike. You don't need to maintain a bike. You don't need to find a space for a bike. You can just get out there and walk. So I think there's lots of things to say for it, and we welcome this focus of the government that they have to really promote it. But I want to put, if I can, to you, Chris, one challenge that we might come to if we get a chance to discuss further, because speaking with our excellent cycling and walking minister, Chris Heaton Harris, he put a challenge back to me, and he said, what do we need to do to make walking more enabled? Surely, we've got pavements which need to be maintained, and that's a big expense. Your pedestrian areas. What more can we do to make it more accessible for people who want to walk around our urban areas? That's something I'm not qualified to speak on, but you as urban planners and engineers will have thoughts on that, and I'd love to hear what they are.
Yeah, it's a great question, as you say, and For me it comes down to one of making it a pleasure. I think society has gone to huge kind of measures to make driving easy, convenient, effortless. The sort of in pure design of motorway junctions and the big sweeping curves. It's all designed to make that activity easy. And I think the great sort of conundrum with walking is, as it's so commonplace, we find it very easy to take it for granted. So whereas if you're driving and come across a pothole, you're very likely to get very cross, and you're probably going to make the front page of a local newspaper. And if you're cycling and you come across a less than perfect infrastructure, you're going to get quite a lot of retweets on Twitter. But if you're walking down a pavement and either there's a car parked on the pavement illegally, or you come across a less than ideal surface, as a whole, I think people just get on with it and walk around it if they can, or just carry on. And I think that's due to the nature of walking being so commonplace, and so essential to us as individuals, I think, which is why we take it for granted. So I think that, from my point of view, it's trying to match the level of ambition we have with cycling and driving to make the experience effortless and pleasurable. And if you think about some of the streets in Europe, which and one in particular I'm thinking of, in Seville, is some very steep hills, and they have a network of outdoor escalators to allow sort of, on the whole, some of the more elderly residents to walk up that hill. But when it gets to the really steep bit, they can take the escalator to the shops. So it makes that experience of walking from home to the shops or to the train station a real pleasure, and they still have a social dynamic and the health dynamic of walking. But actually, the system and the design of that infrastructure is focusing on making that journey for a pleasure to walk. And I think that's the key of sort of the heart of how I like to approach things, is really make it working with sort of human emotion, and think about actually how can I make this journey really quite pleasurable.
I think those are great suggestions, really great suggestions about how pleasurable your walking can be. You look at the difference of walking down a street that has trees. Not only does it help you shelter on a day like this from the rain, but also it makes it more pleasurable to walk. So the trees, the greening of the environment. I think another thing to be said for walking is, of course, that when you walk, it's much easier to predict timing. And being a bit of a old-fashioned fella and a stickler for punctuality, I like the fact that you're pretty much on the nail, say how long it's going to take to get from A to B using an app like City Mapper or something like that. It's very accurate. You don't get stuck in traffic jams. There aren't kind of breakdowns. You're in the tube system or whatever. It's very reliable, and once you actually built in that time, it's pretty much, you can be sure that you're going to get from A to B. So I think that there are a lot of it is about, as you say, I think part of the criticism is with anything new, or with not new, but I mean cycling and road users have very vocal groups and organizations that speak for them. And I know it's the ambition of Living Streets and others, and the Ramblers Association and other walking groups, that perhaps in the past our voice has been a bit diffuse, and you don't really hear from walkers, is to be a positive voice, to really spark the debate about how we increase walking. I think now is the time for it. The government's mind is open to this, and their wallets are open to it. I should say our wallets, taxpayers' money, are open to it. And it's up to us now to, as the door's been opened, to walk through.
I entirely agree. And I think sort of linked to that, and I don't want to touch on or get into politics, but I would really like to bring some of your political expertise into the conversation, if I may. And I'm sure I've missed some in reading about your extensive career, but during your time in the House of Lords, you've held posts with the Departments of Energy and Climate Change, Communities and Local Government, and Children, Schools and Families. I couldn't help thinking that all of these posts have walking at their heart in one way or another. Walking is key to fighting the environmental crisis, as we know. Walking is essential for increasing community cohesion, and I think lockdown has certainly showed us this, especially lockdown 1. Being able to safely walk to school should be at the heart of every child's school life, in my opinion. And I don't know if you fought the corner for walking in all these posts specifically, but with the power that walking has to influence all of these policy agendas and more, not to mention the health agenda, which is of course of great importance to us at the moment. I wonder if you could give us some insight in what we can do, what mechanisms can we use, and what political channels and tools can we use to further the seriousness of walking politically? Because huge leaps and bounds have been made in this year, I think, with the government's plan for gear change. But gear change does sort of focusing on cycling. So how can we really sort of further the seriousness of walking politically and start to better shape cities for walking, do you think?
Well, we're looking forward to the next government green paper on step change.
Quite.
Working title. I think, I accept, the criticism. I know it wasn't intended, Chris, but I accept that, I've held many positions in the Treasury and, Home Office, as you say, energy, climate change, communities and local government, and I haven't actually been vocal about walking. It's been something which I did. I didn't see it as a public policy issue. And to some degree, I really regret that. And my role, which came about with Living Streets, is giving me an opportunity to try and correct some of that by saying, listen, no, it is a public policy issue. And it's much overlooked because it is so commonplace. And, the great thing about that is that you're not trying to get people to do something they're not already doing. You're just asking them to take a few extra steps, each day. To instead of getting on the bus at one particular stop, why not try and walk a little bit further to the next bus stop? The linkage in walking, which I found, seeing the evidence between the relationship between public transport rather than cars and walking, is very significant. People walk further when they use public transport, whereas with cars they tend to walk shorter distances. And obviously, if our streets had less cars on them, they might have more room for pedestrians on them as well, and that might encourage more people to come out. But I think at the moment, the key element is got to be one of health and well-being. In the midst of the pandemic, mental health and physical health and well-being, walking has got a critical part to play in that, because it's so accessible to all ages, and therefore it's an opportunity for us to make some changes there. And if you consider really at the moment, the two biggest issues which are on the international agenda and on the domestic agenda are climate change and the COVID pandemic, and both of them are walking at the heart of solutions. So if we can't make progress now, then we might as well walk on. Because we're never going to make progress. But the benefit is, I know that the government is listening and they're putting money behind it, but they also need ideas and they need people to speak up in favor of walking. And the more that people can do that, and that we become not so much a vocal minority, but a vocal majority, the more progress I think we'll see.
Yeah, very much. And I think politics and urban design have a very successful collaborative future together in my mind, in terms of the impact that the sort of the design of streets can have on such a variety of policy agendas at a time when we need to be very efficient with our expenditure. I think is key. So I think that's great insight, and thank you very much. And I know we could certainly talk for longer, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have, and I know you have to get to some meetings. So I want to thank you very much again. It's been very insightful and a pleasure. I also want to thank everyone who's listening into this. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of ideasSPACE with the Urban Design Group, UrbanNous, and me, Christopher Martin. More episodes coming your way, so please do get in touch if you have any questions. So lastly, thank you, Lord Bates.
Thank you so much.